Welcome to the London Gritty Chronicles. Imagine a busy airport terminal in Tehran. The year is 1975. An El Al plane, the national airline of Israel, taxis down the runway. It is a routine flight. Inside the terminal, Israeli businessmen wait for their luggage alongside Iranian merchants. Israeli engineers are in the city to help build infrastructure. In Tel Aviv, Iranian diplomats attend embassy receptions. This image seems impossible today. It feels like fiction. But for nearly 3 decades, this was the reality. Before the shadow wars, before the rhetoric of destruction, Iran and Israel were not enemies. They were, in many ways, secret partners. To understand the bitterness of the current conflict, we must first understand what was lost. We have to go back to a time when geopolitics created the strangest of bedfellows. Welcome to our deep dive into the evolution of the Iran-Israel conflict. Over the next 10 parts, we will trace this history. From friendship to fury. We will examine the mechanisms of modern conflict, looking at keywords like proxy, deterrence, and escalation. This is a story about how nations change, how ideologies shift, and how a partnership built on pragmatism collapsed into an existential fight. Let's go back to the beginning. In the years following the founding of Israel in 1948, the Middle East was a turbulent place. Israel was surrounded by Arab nations that rejected its existence. Israel needed friends outside this immediate hostile circle. At the same time, Iran, under the rule of the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, felt isolated for different reasons. Iran was a non-Arab, majority Shiite Muslim nation in a region dominated by Sunni Arab states. The Shah also feared the rising influence of the Soviet Union to the north, and radical Arab nationalism, led by figures like Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, to the west. Israel and Iran shared something powerful: common enemies. This shared fear led to a strategy known as the Periphery Doctrine. Listen to that term, Periphery Doctrine. In historical English, a doctrine is a stated principle of government policy, a strategy. The periphery refers to the outer boundary or edge of an area. Israel's first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion, developed this idea. If Israel's immediate neighbors were hostile, Israel would build alliances with the nations on the edge of the Middle East, the periphery. This included Turkey, Ethiopia, and, crucially, Iran. It was a pragmatic alliance. Pragmatic means dealing with things sensibly and realistically, based on practical considerations rather than theory or ideology. They didn't love each other, but they needed each other. On the surface, the relationship was often quiet. Iran, still an Islamic country, did not want to anger its Arab neighbors by being too publicly friendly with Israel. Much of the cooperation happened, as we say in English, behind closed doors. This phrase means secretly, away from public view. But behind those doors, the partnership was intense. Iran was rich in oil, but needed advanced technology and military hardware. Israel lacked natural resources, but had a rapidly developing tech sector and a powerful military industry. It was a perfect match. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, Israel became a major arms supplier to the Shah's army. They collaborated on missile development projects. When Arab nations imposed an oil embargo on Israel after the 1967 and 1973 wars, Iran kept the oil flowing to Tel Aviv. Israeli construction firms built high-rises in Tehran. Israeli agricultural experts helped Iranian farmers improve crop yields in the desert. The intelligence agencies of both countries, Israel's Mossad and Iran's Savak, shared information on common threats. It was a relationship born out of necessity, a paradox in the heart of the Middle East. A paradox is a situation that seems impossible or contradictory because it contains two opposite facts: an Islamic state and the Jewish state, working hand in hand. For the average Israeli in the 1970s, Iran was a friendly destination. It was a place to do business, a regional stabilizer. The Shah viewed Israel as a vital counterweight to the Arab world. But this alliance was built on top of a volcano. While the Shah's generals toasted with Israeli officers, the streets of Iran were seething. The Shah was seen by many Iranians as a corrupt dictator, too close to the West and too repressive of his own people. The pragmatism of the palace was disconnected from the passion of the street. A different kind of power was rising in Iran. It was religious, revolutionary, and fiercely anti-Israel. It was led by an exiled cleric named Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. He spoke a language not of pragmatic alliances, but of spiritual warfare. The golden age of cooperation was about to end amidst smoke and fire. The airport terminals would soon close, and the diplomats would flee. In the next part, we will witness the seismic shift of 1979. We will see how a revolution turned a strategic partner into an ideological foe overnight, setting the stage for decades of conflict. The speed of history can be terrifying. Sometimes, decades of change happen in a single week. In February 1979, the volcano we mentioned in Part 1 finally erupted in Iran. The streets of Tehran were no longer safe for Israeli businessmen. They were barely safe for the Shah himself. The revolution was a massive, chaotic wave. Statues of the Shah were pulled down by cheering crowds with ropes. The sophisticated boutiques selling Western goods were boarded up or burned. Instead of business suits, the streets filled with black robes and the sound of chanting. The Shah fled into exile, taking the old order with him. Days later, an Air France jet landed. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini stepped onto Iranian soil after 15 years away. Millions greeted him. The atmosphere was electric, with hope for some and terrifying dread for others. This was not just a change in government. It was a complete transformation of national identity. The Shah's Iran had been nationalist and secular. In historical English, secular means separate from religion, not governed by religious rules. Khomeini's new Islamic Republic was fundamentally different. It was Islamist and revolutionary. In Khomeini's worldview, the world was sharply divided between the oppressors and the oppressed. He viewed Israel not as a country, but as an illegitimate colonial outpost occupying Muslim land. Illegitimate means not authorized by the law or rules, wrongly established. To the new leaders in Tehran, Israel was a dagger planted by Western powers in the heart of the Islamic world. The pragmatic alliance of the Periphery Doctrine evaporated instantly. It was replaced by fiery ideological hatred. The language changed overnight. The rhetoric became violent. Rhetoric is a useful word to know. It means language designed to have a persuasive or impressive effect on an audience, often lacking in real substance, but very powerful emotionally. The consequences for Israel were concrete and immediate. Just 6 days after the revolution's victory, Iran cut all diplomatic ties with Tel Aviv. The Israeli embassy building in Tehran, once a hub of quiet cooperation, was seized by Revolutionary Guards. In a highly symbolic move, the building was handed over to the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, Israel's primary enemy at the time. The Israeli flag was lowered. The Palestinian flag was raised in its place. Khomeini declared a new doctrine for the world. The United States was branded the Great Satan, and Israel? It was called the Little Satan, or the Zionist entity. This was a declaration of ideological war. The secret partnership was definitely over. Israel had lost a vital regional ally and gained a fierce, vocal enemy. Yet history is rarely a straight line. Just 1 year later, in 1980, a massive, brutal war broke out between Iran and its neighbor, Iraq, led by dictator Saddam Hussein. Suddenly, the revolutionary government in Tehran, which hated Israel, and the government in Jerusalem, which feared Iraq, found themselves in a strange position. They once again shared a dangerous enemy. Would the new ideological hatred outweigh the old strategic necessity? In the chaos of the 1980s, the story of Iran and Israel took another bizarre and secret turn. The 1980s were a dark decade for the Middle East. The war between Iran and Iraq was a grinding, bloody stalemate that lasted for 8 long years. It was reminiscent of the trenches of World War I. Chemical weapons were used, cities were bombarded with missiles, and hundreds of thousands of young men died on the front lines. In this desperate environment, a strange thing happened. The revolutionary government of Iran, the one that called Israel the Little Satan, was desperate for weapons. Saddam Hussein's army was powerful and well supplied. Iran was isolated, and its military hardware, ironically bought from the Shah's time, was breaking down. They needed spare parts. Israel, despite being the new ideological enemy, saw an opportunity. For decades, Israel's biggest threat had been Iraq. A strong Iraq, emerging victorious from a war with Iran, was a terrifying prospect for Israeli leaders. So, a decision was made in Jerusalem. It was another example of pure realpolitik. This is a very useful historical term borrowed from German. It means a system of politics or principles based on practical rather than moral or ideological considerations. The thinking was simple. It was better for Israel if Iran and Iraq kept fighting each other, weakening both nations. This led to a series of secret arms deals. Israel, the Little Satan, began covertly supplying the Islamic Republic with military parts. One of the most famous and confusing episodes of this period was the Iran-Contra affair in the mid-1980s. It was a complex web of secret deals. The United States, which had no diplomatic relations with Iran, used Israel as an intermediary to sell weapons to Tehran. An intermediary is a person or organization that acts as a link between two others to bring about an agreement. The U.S. hoped that in exchange for the weapons, Iran would use its influence to free American hostages held by militant groups in Lebanon. The profits from the arms sales were then secretly funneled by U.S. officials to fund anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua, known as the Contras. When the scandal broke, it was a massive political explosion in Washington. But in the Middle East, it highlighted a bizarre truth. Even while shouting, "Death to Israel," the Iranian regime was secretly doing business with it for survival. However, this tactical cooperation was a temporary aberration, a blip on the radar. It did not change the fundamental trajectory of the relationship. While these secret deals were happening, Iran was busy building something else, something that would become the defining feature of its strategy against Israel. It started in the chaos of another war, the 1982 Lebanon War. Israel invaded Lebanon to root out the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, which was launching attacks into northern Israel. The invasion destabilized Lebanon, a country already fragile from years of its own civil war. Iran saw an opening. It saw a way to export its revolution and directly confront Israel without using its own army. Tehran sent its elite Revolutionary Guards to the Bekaa Valley in eastern Lebanon. Their mission was to organize, train, and arm the local Shiite Muslim population, who were radicalized by the Israeli invasion and years of neglect by their own government. Out of this effort, a new organization was born. It was called Hezbollah, which means Party of God in Arabic. This was the beginning of Iran's most successful and dangerous strategy, the creation of a proxy. A proxy is an agent or substitute authorized to act for another. In geopolitical terms, it's a group that fights on behalf of a state, allowing that state to have influence and inflict damage without directly getting involved in a war. Hezbollah was the prototype. It would become the most powerful non-state military force in the world, and Iran's sharpest weapon against Israel, right on its northern border. The relationship was about to shift from secret deals to indirect war. The chessboard was being reset, and the pieces were moving into place for a long, shadowy conflict. In the next part, we will dive deep into the rise of Hezbollah and understand how Iran used this proxy. The 1982 Lebanon War was a defining moment for Israel. It was the first war it fought not against a formal Arab army, but against a fractured country. It was a quagmire, a long, drawn-out conflict with no clear victory. Into this vacuum, Iran poured its resources. The seeds of Hezbollah were planted in the Bekaa Valley, a region known for its rugged terrain and historical neglect by the Lebanese state. The group was initially small, a collection of radicalized Shiite men inspired by the Iranian Revolution. But Iran's support was transformative. They didn't just send money and weapons, they sent a vision. They sent ideological trainers and military experts from their own Revolutionary Guards. They built a structure. Hezbollah was designed to be a hybrid entity. This is a crucial word for understanding modern conflict. It means something made by combining two different elements. Hezbollah was a political party that provided social services, like hospitals and schools, to Lebanon's poor Shiite population. This won them immense popular support. But it was also, and primarily, a well-disciplined guerrilla army. This dual nature was key to its success. It could operate as a legitimate political actor within the Lebanese state, even winning seats in parliament. Yet it could also act outside the law, beyond the state's control, as a powerful militia with its own foreign policy. For Israel, this was a new and terrifying kind of enemy. Hezbollah wasn't a conventional army you could defeat on a battlefield and force into a peace treaty. It was an idea that had taken root among a population. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, Hezbollah waged a relentless guerrilla war against Israeli forces occupying southern Lebanon. They used tactics like suicide bombings, roadside bombs, and kidnappings. This is where the concept of asymmetric warfare becomes central. This is a term used when the two sides in a conflict are very different in their military power and tactics. A weaker side, like Hezbollah, cannot defeat a conventional army like Israel's in a direct fight. Instead, it uses tactics that exploit the stronger side's vulnerabilities. It avoids large battles and focuses on inflicting a steady, painful toll, wearing down the enemy's will to fight. Hezbollah's goal was not to conquer Israel, but to make the cost of its occupation in Lebanon unbearable. They succeeded. In 2000, after 18 years of occupation, Israel unilaterally withdrew its forces from southern Lebanon. For the first time, an Arab force had compelled Israel to retreat without a peace treaty or a significant military defeat. This was a massive ideological victory for Hezbollah, and by extension, for Iran. The narrative was powerful. The Zionist entity could be defeated through resistance and martyrdom. The model was proven. A non-state proxy could achieve strategic goals that states with large armies had failed to do for decades. But the story didn't end with the withdrawal. The border between Israel and Lebanon remained tense. Hezbollah did not disarm. Instead, it used the relative calm to build a massive arsenal of rockets and missiles, supplied by Iran and often smuggled through Syria. This arsenal became the core of Iran's strategy of deterrence against Israel. Deterrence is a fundamental concept in international relations. It is the action of discouraging an action or event through instilling doubt or fear of the consequences. Iran's message to Israel was clear. If you attack us directly, our proxy Hezbollah will unleash thousands of rockets on your cities. This created a powerful balance of terror that has largely held for years. However, this balance was fragile. The potential for a miscalculation was always there, a spark that could ignite a much larger war. And in 2006, that spark was lit. A cross-border raid by Hezbollah, which kidnapped 2 Israeli soldiers, triggered a massive, month-long war between Israel and Hezbollah. The 2006 Lebanon War was a brutal conflict. Israel bombarded Lebanon's infrastructure and Hezbollah's strongholds. Hezbollah fired thousands of rockets into northern Israel, paralyzing life for 1 million Israelis. The war ended in a stalemate, but the psychological impact was immense. It showed the destructive power of Iran's proxy strategy. It also revealed the limitations of Israel's conventional military power against a deeply embedded guerrilla force. The conflict was far from over. It was evolving. Iran was no longer just supporting a militia in Lebanon. It was looking at the entire map of the Middle East, seeking to build a network of influence that would encircle its enemies. The stage was set for the next chapter, the expansion of Iran's influence into the heart of the Arab world. In the next part, we will see how a civil war in another country, Syria, became a golden opportunity for Iran. The civil war in Syria, which began in 2011, was another turning point. It was a brutal conflict that displaced millions. and killed hundreds of thousands. But for Iran, it was also an opportunity. Syria, under the Assad family, had been Iran's only significant state ally in the Arab world for decades. A strategic partnership that was based on shared interests, not ideology. When the Syrian government began to crumble, Iran saw a grave threat to its entire strategy. A Syria without the Assads would be a disaster for Iran. It would break the axis of resistance it was painstakingly building. So, Iran intervened. Not just with money and weapons, but with a massive deployment of its own forces and those of its proxies. The Quds Force, the elite external operations wing of Iran's Revolutionary Guards, led by the charismatic and shadowy general Qasem Soleimani, took command of the battlefield in Syria. Soleimani was the architect of Iran's entire regional strategy. He was not just a military commander, he was a diplomat, a spy chief, and a political strategist all in one. Under his guidance, Iran flooded Syria with fighters. These fighters weren't just Iranians. Soleimani built a multinational army of Shiite militias from across the region, from Lebanon, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. He created a foreign legion of loyal fighters, all under the command of the Quds Force. This was a masterclass in proxy warfare on a continental scale. The goal was not just to save the Assad regime. It was to use the chaos of the Syrian civil war to achieve a long-held Iranian ambition. A land corridor stretching from Iran through Iraq and Syria all the way to the Mediterranean Sea and the border of Israel. This land bridge would allow Iran to move weapons, fighters, and influence across the region freely, bypassing the need for risky air or sea shipments. It was a strategic game-changer. For Israel, this was a nightmare scenario. A hostile Iran with a powerful and well-supplied proxy army right on its doorstep in the Golan Heights. The Israeli Air Force began a campaign of hundreds of airstrikes in Syria. Their targets were Iranian weapons convoys, military bases, and the infrastructure of the Quds Force. This campaign, which has become known as the War Between Wars, was a mostly secret effort. Israel's objective was not to topple the Assad regime, but to prevent Iran from entrenching itself militarily in Syria. It was a cat-and-mouse game of intelligence and precision strikes. The term entrenchment is important here. It means to establish something so firmly that it is very difficult or impossible to change. Iran was trying to entrench its military presence in Syria, and Israel was determined to prevent it. This conflict was characterized by a delicate balance of red lines. A red line is a boundary or limit which should not be crossed. Israel made it clear that any attempt by Iran to move advanced weaponry to Hezbollah in Lebanon or to build a permanent military infrastructure near its border would be met with force. Iran, in turn, tried to establish its own red lines, sometimes by firing missiles at the Israeli Golan Heights. This led to direct, if limited, confrontations between Israeli and Iranian forces. The situation in Syria was incredibly complex and dangerous. Russian forces were also present, supporting the Assad regime. The U.S. had troops in eastern Syria. Turkish forces were in the north. The skies over Syria were crowded with warplanes from multiple nations, all with different agendas. Israel had to navigate this geopolitical minefield carefully. It had to coordinate its actions with Russia to avoid accidental clashes. It had to keep the U.S. informed. The war between wars was a success for Israel in that it significantly disrupted and delayed Iran's plans in Syria. It prevented the construction of large-scale Iranian military bases, but it could not stop the flow of weapons to Hezbollah entirely. And the conflict was not just happening on the ground and in the air, it was also taking place in a new domain, one that was invisible but no less destructive. In the next part, we will move from the battlefields of Syria to the silent, digital front line, the cyber war between Iran and Israel. The war in Syria was a messy, bloody conflict. But the conflict between Iran and Israel was not just about physical territory. It was also a battle for the digital world, and it was about to get a lot more personal. The cyber domain was a new frontier for warfare. It offered a way to attack an enemy's critical infrastructure without ever firing a shot. No bombs, no bullets, just code. In 2010, the world woke up to a new reality with the discovery of Stuxnet. It was a sophisticated computer worm that had been secretly planted in the control systems of Iran's Natanz uranium enrichment facility. Stuxnet was a digital weapon of unprecedented complexity. It was designed to cause the centrifuges at Natanz to spin out of control and destroy themselves, while simultaneously displaying normal operating data to the Iranian engineers. The attack was a major setback for Iran's nuclear program, which it claimed was for peaceful purposes, but which Israel and the West suspected was aimed at developing nuclear weapons. The attack was widely attributed to a joint operation by Israel and the United States. Stuxnet was a watershed moment. It showed that a cyber attack could have real-world kinetic effects, just like a bomb. It was the first known instance of a cyber weapon used to physically damage a target. Iran was furious. The attack was a humiliating blow to its national pride and a clear violation of its sovereignty. In response, Iran began to invest heavily in its own cyber capabilities. It built up a formidable cyber army known as the Iranian Cyber Army and began to launch its own attacks against Israel and other targets. These attacks were not just about revenge. They were also about gathering intelligence, disrupting critical services, and spreading propaganda. One of Iran's most significant cyber operations was the Shamoon virus, which in 2012 attacked Saudi Aramco, the world's largest oil company. The attack destroyed the data on over 30,000 computers, causing massive disruption to the company's operations. Iran also launched a series of cyber attacks against Israeli financial institutions, government agencies, and critical infrastructure. They hacked into websites, stole data, and disrupted services. The conflict had entered a new phase, a tit-for-tat cyber war. This phrase, which you might hear in historical English, means an action taken in revenge for a previous action. It comes from the phrase, this for that. This digital battlefield was a constant game of cat and mouse. Each side was constantly trying to find vulnerabilities in the other's networks and to develop new and more sophisticated cyber weapons. It was a war of attrition in the digital realm. A war of attrition is a prolonged conflict in which each side seeks to gradually wear out the other by a series of small-scale actions. The cyber war was also a way for both sides to signal their intent without escalating to a full-scale kinetic conflict. It was a way to send a message: we can hurt you, even if we don't want a war. But the stakes were incredibly high. A successful cyber attack on critical infrastructure could have devastating consequences. It could cause power outages, disrupt transportation systems, or even lead to the release of hazardous materials. The cyber war was also linked to other aspects of the conflict. For example, Cyber espionage could be used to gather intelligence on the other side's military activities in Syria or Lebanon. And cyber attacks could be used to disrupt the other side's ability to communicate or coordinate its actions. The cyber domain had become an integral part of the conflict, a silent battlefield where the war was fought with code and keyboards. And the stakes were not just about data and networks, they were about national security and the very existence of the states involved. The cyber war was a symptom of a deeper conflict, one that was increasingly centered on Iran's nuclear ambitions. In the next part, we will explore the evolution of Iran's nuclear program and how it became the central point of tension between Iran and Israel, leading to a series of covert operations and assassinations. The year was 2015. The world watched as Iran and 6 major powers, including the United States, Russia, and China, signed a landmark agreement in Vienna. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, was designed to curb Iran's nuclear program in exchange for the lifting of crippling economic sanctions. For Israel, this agreement was a nightmare. It was a betrayal. Israel believed that the deal would not stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons, but would merely delay it. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, had been warning the world about Iran's nuclear ambitions for years. He had called the program an existential threat. The deal was seen by Israel as a way for the international community to legitimize Iran's nuclear activities. It was a massive strategic defeat for Israel. However, the JCPOA was a huge diplomatic victory for Iran. It allowed the country to rejoin the global economy and to be treated as a legitimate player on the world stage. But the deal was fragile. In 2018, President Donald Trump announced that the United States was withdrawing from the JCPOA. He imposed a new set of sanctions on Iran, known as the Maximum Pressure Campaign. This decision was met with celebration in Israel. It was seen as a vindication of its long-standing position on the nuclear deal. But the withdrawal from the JCPOA also led to a sharp increase in tensions. Iran responded by gradually resuming its nuclear activities, exceeding the limits set by the deal. Iran's nuclear program became a game of brinkmanship. This is a dangerous policy of pursuing a course of action to the edge of war in order to achieve the most advantageous outcome. Iran was trying to pressure the other signatories of the deal, especially the European countries, to find a way to circumvent U.S. sanctions. It was a risky strategy that could easily lead to a military confrontation. The situation was further complicated by a series of unexplained incidents at Iran's nuclear facilities. In 2020, a major fire broke out at the Natanz facility, which Iran blamed on an act of sabotage by Israel. Israel, for its part, did not confirm or deny any involvement in the incident. But it was clear that a covert war was being waged against Iran's nuclear program. This war was not just about physical sabotage, it was also about intelligence gathering, cyber attacks, and assassinations. Over the years, several Iranian nuclear scientists and officials have been assassinated in mysterious circumstances. These attacks were also widely attributed to Israel. The most prominent of these was the 2020 assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the head of Iran's nuclear weapons program. He was killed in a roadside ambush near Tehran. These covert operations were a way for Israel to disrupt Iran's nuclear program without launching a full-scale military attack. They were also a way to send a message to Iran that its nuclear ambitions would not be tolerated. But they also carried a huge risk of escalation. They could easily lead to a cycle of revenge attacks that could spiral out of control. The conflict over Iran's nuclear program was not just about weapons of mass destruction. It was also about the balance of power in the Middle East. A nuclear-armed Iran would be a major shift in the regional power dynamics. It would give Iran a huge strategic advantage over its rivals, especially Israel and Saudi Arabia. It would also make it much harder for the international community to contain Iran's other activities in the region, such as its support for terrorist groups. The conflict over Iran's nuclear program was a high-stakes game of poker, with the future of the Middle East at stake. In the next part, we will look at how Iran and Israel have used diplomacy and alliances to try to isolate each other and to build support for their positions. The Middle East is a region of shifting alliances. Iran and Israel are two of the most significant players in this complex geopolitical game. They are both deeply engaged in a diplomatic dance, trying to build support and isolate each other. They are using a variety of tools, from soft power to hard power. One of Iran's most effective tools is its influence in the region. Iran has built a network of allies and proxies that gives it a significant presence across the Middle East. These allies include Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Assad regime in Syria, Shiite militias in Iraq, and the Houthi movement in Yemen. These groups are not just military proxies. They also provide social services and political support to their local populations. This gives Iran a deep and lasting influence in these countries. Iran has also tried to build relationships with other countries in the region, such as Turkey and Qatar. These countries have their own complex relationships with Iran and Israel, and they are often willing to cooperate with both sides. Israel, on the other hand, has its own set of allies and partners. The most important of these is the United States. Israel has a special relationship with the U.S., which provides it with significant military and diplomatic support. Israel also has a strong relationship with several other Western countries, such as the United Kingdom and Germany. These countries are often willing to support Israel's security concerns. In recent years, Israel has also been trying to build relationships with Arab countries that share its concerns about Iran. This has led to the normalization of relations between Israel and several Arab states, including the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. These agreements, known as the Abraham Accords, were a major diplomatic breakthrough for Israel. They signaled a significant shift in the region's geopolitical landscape. The accords were seen as a blow to Iran, which has long sought to isolate Israel. They also opened up new opportunities for cooperation between Israel and its new Arab partners. But the accords were not without controversy. They were criticized by many Palestinians who felt that they were being abandoned by their Arab brethren. They were also condemned by Iran, which saw them as a betrayal of the Palestinian cause. The conflict between Iran and Israel is not just about military power. It is also about a battle for hearts and minds. Both countries are trying to win the support of the international community and to influence public opinion in the region. They are using a variety of tools to do this, from propaganda to cultural diplomacy. They are also trying to exploit the divisions and conflicts within the region to their own advantage. The conflict is a long and complex one, and it is unlikely to be resolved anytime soon. It is a conflict that is deeply rooted in history, religion, and politics. And it is a conflict that is constantly evolving. The players are changing, the tactics are changing, and the stakes are getting higher. In the final part, we will summarize the key points of this deep dive into the Iran-Israel conflict. We will look at the current state of the conflict and the prospects for the future. The conflict between Iran and Israel is a multifaceted war that has played out over decades on multiple fronts. We have explored its historical roots, from a period of pragmatic cooperation to a revolution that turned them into ideological enemies. We've examined the tools of this conflict: proxy warfare, cyber operations, and the high-stakes game of nuclear brinkmanship. But the story is not over. The conflict is constantly evolving, driven by a complex interplay of regional dynamics, international politics, and internal pressures within both countries. Today, the conflict is at a critical juncture. The collapse of the JCPOA, the acceleration of Iran's nuclear program, and the ongoing shadow war have created a highly volatile situation. The risk of miscalculation and escalation is higher than ever. A key factor in the current landscape is the changing role of the United States in the Middle East. For decades, the U.S. has been the dominant external power in the region, and its unwavering support for Israel has been a cornerstone of its policy. However, in recent years, there has been a growing debate in Washington about the extent of U.S. involvement in the Middle East. Some argue that the U.S. should reduce its footprint in the region and focus on other global priorities, such as competition with China. Others argue that the U.S. must remain fully engaged to counter Iran's influence and ensure the security of its allies, including Israel. This uncertainty about the future of U.S. policy adds another layer of complexity to the Iran-Israel conflict. Both sides are closely watching Washington's moves, trying to anticipate its next steps and adjust their strategies accordingly. Another important factor is the growing assertiveness of other regional powers, such as Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates. These countries have their own interests and ambitions, and they are increasingly willing to act independently to protect them. This has led to a more fluid and unpredictable regional environment, where alliances can shift rapidly. The normalization agreements between Israel and several Arab states, known as the Abraham Accords, are a prime example of this shifting landscape. These agreements, which were brokered by the U.S., have created a new strategic alignment in the region, uniting Israel and its Arab partners against their common adversary, Iran. However, the accords have also generated new tensions and divisions. They have been condemned by Iran and its allies, who see them as a betrayal of the Palestinian cause. They have also been criticized by some in the Arab world, who believe that normalization with Israel should only come after a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The internal political dynamics in both Iran and Israel are also playing a significant role in shaping the conflict. In Iran, hardliners have consolidated their power in recent years, adopting a more confrontational stance towards the West and its allies. The election of Ibrahim Raisi as president in 2021 was seen as a victory for the hardline faction and a signal of a more aggressive foreign policy. In Israel, the political landscape has been equally turbulent. The country has held multiple inconclusive elections in recent years, leading to a period of political instability. This has made it difficult for Israeli leaders to formulate a coherent long-term strategy towards Iran. The conflict between Iran and Israel is not just a struggle for power and influence, it is also a clash of ideologies and identities. Iran, as a self-proclaimed leader of the Shiite world and a champion of the Palestinian cause, sees Israel as an illegitimate entity that has usurped Muslim land. Israel, on the other hand, views Iran as an existential threat. a state that is bent on its destruction and the export of its revolutionary ideology. These deep-seated animosities are fueling a conflict that shows no signs of abating. Both sides are investing heavily in their military capabilities, preparing for a potential future confrontation. They are also engaged in a constant battle for hearts and minds, trying to win the support of the international community and to influence public opinion in the region. In the final part, we will synthesize these complex dynamics and look ahead to the uncertain future of the Iran-Israel conflict. We will consider the potential scenarios, from a continued low-level conflict to a full-scale war, and explore the possibilities for de-escalation and diplomacy. We have traveled a long road together, from the busy airport terminals of 1975, where Israelis and Iranians arrived together, to the silent, tense server rooms where cyber weapons are launched today. We have seen how a pragmatic alliance, born of shared fears, collapsed into an ideological war that has defined the Middle East for 4 decades. Where does this leave us now? The story is far from over. In fact, we may be entering its most dangerous chapter. Today, the shadow war is stepping into the light. The conflict is no longer just about secret handshakes or deniable proxy attacks. It is becoming increasingly direct and increasingly visible. Attacks on oil tankers in the Persian Gulf, drone strikes on military facilities inside Iran, assassinations of high-profile scientists on the streets of Tehran, and the constant bombing of Iranian-linked targets in Syria. The war between wars is heating up. The old rules of the game are breaking down. The lines between what is a proxy action and what is a direct state attack are blurring. A key term for this current phase is paradigm shift. In historical English, a paradigm shift is a fundamental change in the usual approach or underlying assumptions about something. The 1979 revolution was one paradigm shift. The Abraham Accords, where Arab nations began making peace with Israel, are another. We are living through a moment where the basic assumptions of regional politics are being rewritten. Another crucial concept is the status quo. This refers to the existing state of affairs, the way things are right now. Both Iran and Israel are deeply unhappy with the current status quo. Each feels threatened by the other's growing power and is constantly trying to alter the situation in their own favor, often through risky actions. So, what does the future hold? Historians and analysts look at a few possible scenarios. The first is a continuation of the current path, a perpetual, grinding conflict. The war between wars continues indefinitely. There are cyber attacks, assassinations, and flare-ups on the borders, but both sides manage to avoid an all-out direct war because the costs are just too high. This is a grim future of constant tension, where the region lives permanently on edge. The second scenario is the one everyone fears: escalation to a full-scale war. This could happen through a miscalculation. A missile goes astray and kills many civilians. A red line is crossed, like Iran producing a nuclear weapon or Hezbollah launching a massive attack that overwhelms Israel's defenses. Such a war would be devastating. It would likely involve thousands of missiles raining down on cities in Israel and Iran. It could draw in the entire region, from Lebanon to Yemen, and potentially pull in global powers like the United States. It is a scenario of immense destruction that leaders on both sides desperately want to avoid, even as they prepare for it. The third scenario is a diplomatic breakthrough. This seems the least likely right now, given the deep mistrust and ideological hatred. But history has shown us that enemies can become partners, as they were before 1979. A new nuclear deal, or a broader regional security arrangement, could de-escalate tensions. But the political will for such a bold move is currently hard to find in either Tehran or Jerusalem. The conflict between Iran and Israel is a modern tragedy of geopolitics. It is a story of how fear, ideology, and the pursuit of power can turn potential partners into mortal enemies. It is a conflict with many flashpoints. A flashpoint is a place or situation where sudden violence is likely to erupt. The border with Lebanon, the Golan Heights in Syria, the Strait of Hormuz, the nuclear facilities at Natanz. The map of the Middle East is dotted with them. Understanding this history, from the Periphery Doctrine to the rise of Hezbollah, from the Stuxnet virus to the Abraham Accords, is essential. It is not just about understanding the past. It is the only way to make sense of the dangerous headlines of today and to navigate the uncertain future of one of the world's most volatile regions. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the London Gritty Chronicles.